Hello, my name is Adam Ritz of the Okanagan Combat Guild, located here in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. Today, I'm going to show you guys my club's interpretation of what Maya refers to as the rose. Now, what is the rose, you may ask? To put it simply, it's a handwork closely related to winding. Now, it's kind of notorious out in the community because Maya doesn't really explain it very well. Instead, he simply says to use it or go through it. By making this video, we hope to convince you guys of our interpretation of Maya's The Rose and contribute it to the HEMA community so that everybody can understand the art of combat better. Let's go take a look. Maya mentions the rose in all his weapons, with the exception of his dagger and wrestling section. This includes longsword, dussac, rapier, and even the polearm section. It resembles and looks like a rose. It is used to get around your opponent's weapon in a circular type fashion. We're going to present to you some evidence and backstory on how we came to our interpretation and why we believe our interpretations are correct. So back in September of 2017, Chad had a eureka moment. While everyone seems to think Maya's rose refers to the flower, Chad thought, what if he means a compass rose? It was this thought that led us to our current interpretation. This is a compass. The earliest one was found in China and came from the time period of the Han Dynasty, which lasted from 202 BC to 220 AD. At first we thought it was the compass that held the key to interpreting the rose, and we spent some time using that theory. Then in October 2019, I stumbled upon something that helped us realize the interpretation even better. This is a wind rose. In German, Windrosen. And this would have been a common thing for someone to see in Maya's time across all of Europe. A wind rose is often drawn on a map and showed the 8 principal winds: north, northeast, east, southeast, south, southwest, west, and northwest. The German tradition of fencing teaches 8 windings. This includes winding on the inside and outside of your opponent's blade to all 4 openings. Paulus Hector Mayer describes in his treatise that the rose arises from the windings. If winding and the rose are interconnected, then perhaps that means winding refers to the hilt, moving through the compass winds, and the rose refers to the tip, doing the same. To better understand this, we must look at the tool we are using and the mechanics of how it works. The sword is a lever. Wikipedia describes, a lever amplifies an input force to provide a greater output force, which is said to provide leverage. The ratio of the output force to the input force is the mechanical advantage of the lever. As such, the lever is a mechanical advantage device, trading off force against movement. The lever has 3 parts: the fulcrum, the point at which the lever rotates, the effort, which is the force that is applied to the lever, and finally, the load, which is the force that the lever applies to the object. The dominant hand that holds the sword near the crossguard is the fulcrum. The secondary hand near the pommel is our effort, and the theoretical object at the tip of the sword is our load. However, in this case, the goal is to move the tip of the sword so it becomes our load. Since the only object the tip is pushing against is air, that means the tip can rotate wickedly fast with only air resistance. Now the question remains, how does this relate to our interpretation, and how can we use this? Here we see various examples of winding. In Maya's time, thrusting was not allowed. However, here we will show examples of both thrusting and cutting. There are 8 windings in the German tradition of swordsmanship. This involves winding on the inside and outside of your opponent's blade in all 4 openings or quadrants. In watching these examples, pay close attention to the hilt and the point at which the swords bind. Like we discussed, a sword is a lever, the hand being the fulcrum. But when we bind, we can change the nature of the lever. We can make the point of binding our fulcrum, and we can then rotate the blade from this point. When we meet our opponent in the bind, we can rotate our blade by moving the hilt. This realigns the tip into a more advantageous position and results in either our opponent's weak of their sword falling towards our strong, or our blade strong moving towards their weak. It often also places our long or short edge against the flat of their blade. This is the nature and definition of winding. These are a list of handworks found in Meyer's Art of Combat that all involve winding. Some of these are a winding action themselves, and some incorporate a winding action as part of the handwork. If we look at the word windrose, it has two halves, both of which are mentioned in Meyer's book and other sources. But how do the winds on a windrose relate to winding and the rose in swordplay? In winding, the hilt is the focus, and as you see here, the hilt rotates in a circular fashion. You could even say through the winds on a compass. You may have already noticed, but to achieve a wider range in our winding, we need to use a different kind of grip. This is the standard handshake grip. It ensures our blade and tip come out before our hands do, is optimal for cutting, and keeps a strong wrist structure. This is the thumb grip. Our forward hand places its thumb on the flat of the blade. This realignment makes certain cuts, techniques, and parries possible and easier to accomplish. Some good examples are the squinting, crooked, and crown cuts. But if we transition our left hand from the grip and onto the pommel, it creates even more opportunity. Our hand and the pommel become a ball and socket joint, allowing a much greater range of motion. Something that seems to be often overlooked in Meyer's book is that about half the longsword woodcuts show the use of this pommel grip. In addition, when one of the rose devices is mentioned, the woodcut shows an interesting position with hand on pommel. This position without the pommel grip is awkward and structurally weak, but we'll get to this in a bit. So I think now with all the things discussed up until this point, we are ready to look at our interpretation of the rose. Before we show you our interpretation, I'd like to explain the rules we have for interpreting material. They are as follows. 1. The interpretation must match what is described in the text. If it does not do that, then something is clearly missing. 2. Whatever the interpretation is, it must consistently work under duress. For example, the opponent must be actively trying to hit you and stop you from performing your intended actions. And 3. The interpretation must be simple. This is not to say that the action does not require practice to perform, just that it can be done at the proper speed and is an action that could reasonably be done while sparring. So what is our interpretation? The rose is a handwork that winds the tip of your weapon in a circle, often around your opponent's weapon. We start from the middle guard on our right side. As we step in with our right foot, we perform a middle cut from our right. Without stopping, changing, or slowing the cut, we simply push the pommel from its initial position facing west, up through the north winds, and finish facing east. This action describes an arc. If done properly, you should end with your long edge bound on the inside of your opponent's blade. We could take an additional passing step and thrust from here. However, we know that's a big no-no in Meyer's time, so he says that your blade should almost come back to the middle guard. You can interpret this a few ways, but we interpret it as coming back to the side guard with right leg forward, side guard essentially being a forward-weighted middle guard. At this point, we have essentially barred our opponent on the top of their sword. From here, we can now make a passing step to the left and quite freely strike our opponent with our foible. In this case, we like a squinting cut with crossed hands. The next device starts the same way and offers a different ending to it. Once we have barred our opponent, he tries to escape and cut to our opening. Meyer states we have plenty of time to see this and react, for he will not come so quickly as if by surprise to your opening, but that you will meantime come around with the rose, such that you will come to take him out in plenty of time. Once he has used slinging to escape this barring and strike at us, we can displace his cut and strike to his opening, or as Meyer recommends, loop around in order to deceive him and cut to the next opening. next device comes from the long point section. In this scenario, we have met in the bind. In the same fashion as the first device, we rotate the pommel from southwest to southeast, where we find ourselves in this alternate grip. To finish, Myra says to simply cast the short edge up. This can be done using the circle, unwinding into a cross squinting cut, or simply threatening thrust. Here we can see this device finished in the same way as the one before. And finally, if our opponent offsets our threatened thrust, we can turn the pommel through the rows back to the original position for a covered thrust. Now remember earlier when I referenced that woodcut with the odd grip? Here it is. Odd as this position looks, it is actually quite strong, but only with the pommel grip. If we try to keep our regular handshake grip, our wrist bends in a weak and structurally bad position. We would need to rotate our body quite a lot to give it good form, but then we would not look like the image. When our opponent cuts in looking to bind, we do so too, but by moving through the rows, we come into this advantageous bind. Our pommel must rotate from southwest to northeast before ending up in this crossed hanging position. From here, Meyer offers two endings. First, we must catch him more horizontally and then wrench towards our right, continuing the motion into a crossed hand squinter. This makes sense when our opponent is bound hard. The second only demands that we meet their blade in order to stop the cut before unwinding the blade to hit them with our long edge. Our pommel will travel from a northeast position, left hand on top, counterclockwise all the way back to northeast with our left hand under our right. Accompanied by a double step, this device becomes very fast and, to quote Meyer, proceeds unexpectedly, very swiftly, surely, and strongly. This one, however, lends itself to a bind where our opponent is weak or pulls away. Now, seeing as all the devices will be covered in our Meyer series, we are going to move on to some examples from the other weapons before concluding this video. To see that video, click the link in the description. So in summary, what is the rose? The rose is the winding of the tip in order to move around your opponent's blade via the pommel. It references moving the pommel through the winds of the windrows, and even can be found in Meyer's cutting diagram. I would like to thank all of you who watched this video, and I hope we can count on your support for future projects and videos. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We also welcome any constructive feedback and comments you may have. Until next time, have a great day and good luck in your training.